We're interested in using the large-scale data that becomes available from the SARS coronavirus 2 outbreak and using that with the other large-scale data that's available about human genes and proteins, so that we can try to understand why the virus causes disease, why it differs from other related viruses, and why we see different responses in individuals.
My research is set out to explore the impact of COVID-19 on community pharmacies and community pharmacy teams. When GPs closed their doors and went on to digital consultations, pharmacists were still open and had to communicate by face-to-face interactions.
Don't forget, you as an individual matter. You have a role to play. Every day you live, you make an impact, and you get to choose what sort of impact you make.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 6th and final instalment in our Next Generation Impact series, where we've been talking about all aspects of the impact agenda. I'm Professor Shane Weller and I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Innovation at the University of Kent. Today's event is a very special session. In a moment, I'm going to be joined by the Executive Chair of Research England, David Sweeney. David oversees the strategy and functions of the organisation, and I'm pleased to say we're going to have the opportunity this afternoon to learn more about the thinking that initially went into the higher education impact agenda and to reflect on how that agenda changed strategic thinking in HE. We will also be discussing whether the pandemic has raised expectations for academics to deliver impact through their research. And beyond that, we hope to answer some of the sector's most pressing questions. Will there be another Research Excellence Framework, or REF as most of us refer to it? What will it look like? And what role is impact likely to play within it? If you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook, you can also join in the discussion by sending us any questions or comments in the live chat sidebars on whichever stream you are watching on. I'll put those questions to David towards the end of today's event. You can also tweet your questions and comments using the hashtag NextGenerationImpact. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome David Sweeney. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be with you. It's a pleasure and a privilege. The very first days of my career, working as a researcher in horticulture, brought me into contact with Kent. It's still strong, of course, in that area, and I'm looking forward to discussions with you.
Excellent. So I think my first question to get things rolling is a question I think that is in many people's minds right now, and it is, will there be another REF?
Well, I can't give an answer to that because we've set up something called the Future Research Assessment Programme. The Minister wrote to me, although in this context I'm representing the 4 devolved funding bodies of the UK rather than just Research England, and asked us to establish a programme that consulted widely around what the arrangements for the next assessment system would be. We've been delighted to have actually a stellar international panel of advisors. But really what we want, and we've also had already a set of roundtables with many particular groups within academia, but we're at the early stage of the exercise. We'll be publishing some stuff, there'll be a consultation, there'll be many meetings around that, and at some time, I hope towards the middle of next year, we might have an answer for you. A long way to go, but if you believe that you've got to consult both your community and wider stakeholders, society generally, then you've got to go through that exercise. And I think we've previously found great benefit from the discussions we've had. I think so it will be this time.
Thank you, David. Looking at REF 2021, do you think that the balance between environment, research outputs and impact was about right? And working on the assumption that there would be another REF, Could we expect to see a shift in that balance, do you think, in the future? So we saw a balance was 60% on outputs, 25% on impact, and 15% on environment in 2021. And I suppose the question really is, do you think impact is likely to have a greater importance in any future REF?
I'm not sure whether future REFs will work precisely in the same categories of environment, impact, and outputs. I think that's a question to be asked. I think to make statements about that assumes that we've already predetermined the form of the next exercise, and I don't think that's the case. I think there's a number of ways of answering your question. The first way is, are you trying to indicate the importance of those categories that you chose to use? If that's the case, then the percentages wouldn't be actually as I have them. I think I'd put rather more attention on the environment, to be honest. But and quite possibly one would want to increase the impact rating. But it's not just about importance. It's about the rigor and reliability of the data that you collect. And I think there are many challenges to collect good data on environment. And that limits, I think, the weight you can put on the data that you collect. I think we can't decide about reliance that we can place on the impact data till we run the exercise, and the panels are meeting now, and look at the level of discrimination there has been and get feedback from the panels about the difficulty they had or otherwise in coming to decisions. I think there are questions about the way we assess outputs and the way we choose to reward them, as well as questions about impact and environment. So really, your question's assuming too much about the next exercise, or at least more than I'm willing to assume.
Thanks, David, and that was very interesting to hear your comments there about the importance of environment. I suppose looking back, what would you describe as the original thinking? How would you describe the original thinking behind the development of the impact agenda in terms of what it was aiming to achieve? And do you consider that it has been successful so far in that?
Well, I think it's for others to assess whether it's been successful. It's certainly achieved a range of things. I would say most of them were beneficial, but I think that's not for someone like me to say it firmly. We started earlier than 2008, actually, when there was a proposal by the government, by the Treasury, actually, to reform research assessment in that it was done purely on a metric basis. There was an enormous pushback from the sector, fully justified, I've got to say. I think it was a misguided way of looking at things. It was then, it is now. But in the discussions that happened, this before I joined HEFCE, and indeed David Eastwood was very active in this, the Treasury accepted that we needed to stay with a system that involved review rather than just metrics. But they said, we want you to look at the impact that research has had, which of course metrics are incredibly poor at doing in any event, at least when looked across all disciplines. So I moved from being essentially in your job, Shane, at Royal Holloway, Pro Vice-Chancellor for Research, Vice Principal for Research as it was there, to HEFCE. I was summoned by David Eastwood and said, your job is to deliver impact in the REF. And as it turned out, because we were doing something retrospectively and other attempts at impact were prospective, which is much, much more difficult to predict impact, the REF became the focus for the impact agenda. Now, why? The Treasury's line was clear, rational, and sensible, unlike their views on metrics. They said in spending reviews over the years, you scientists, they tend to view it in those ways, told us that if we gave you more money, you deliver lots of results. Okay, show us the beef. Where are the results? They were then, and I think still are, convinced that our way of assessing the underpinning quality of research, the traditional RAE and now REF measures were sound. They're a good way of getting reliable advice. Do the same thing for impact, was the request. Prove that what you claimed is true. Now, you can unpick that quite a lot, but fundamentally I think it's a reasonable request. How it started is simple. Personally, I thought, how on earth do we do something like this? I thought, we assess outputs. Why don't we assess case studies and mark them in roughly the same way? I thought that up one weekend actually, and went into my old, into my old institution, told them we were going to do this in that sort of arrogant way that you do, and they weren't very keen. They pointed out all the pitfalls. Well, then we discovered actually that in Australia they'd worked out a methodology for doing this, but failed to implement it for actually reasons to do with internal Australian politics. So we engaged the Australians, who were wonderful, and we've worked actually for years doing some stuff in parallel, some stuff slightly differently. And indeed, the way which we took forward their work, piloted and implemented, and then also piloted by them, has led to similar but different lines, similar principles applied in many other countries. So nobody runs something like the REF. They are now looking hard at either case study or metric ways of developing impact. But the key question was, prove it. So did we prove it? At the end of the REF in 2014, a senior Treasury person came and talked to one of our conferences, actually HEFCE conferences, and basically said that we believe we've had useful information. They had 6,975 case studies, I think it was. Really, there were lots and lots and lots of overwhelming information about the impact that universities had had. So in that sense, it worked. We're doing it again, refined slightly. There are many things to learn, things that we could change, but all of that has got to be, in my view, put in an entirely different context for the coming period.
Oh, that's really fascinating, and yes, the emphasis you place there on the internationalization of this kind of exercise is also very, very interesting. I'd like to turn now to a question that I think preoccupies many academics when it comes to impact in the UK, and that is, how can we ensure that this agenda remains ethical and that industries don't unduly influence research outcomes in the long run? And how can we ensure that impact ultimately serves the public good?
That's something that was discussed at length as we developed it, and the simple answer is that you have a mixture of people doing the assessment, people from within academia, but also ideally just as many people from outside academia, whose judgment about what's good and not good is used to influence what happens, and we essentially trust our peers and those who are substantial stakeholders in that the research that it's done in UK universities makes a difference to them in their job. So you trust people to make judgments, I think. I think on ethics, I think we need to reframe this a little bit. We have had an impact agenda, almost as if it was a lovely Aladdin's lamp that we polished and results came out. An object that perhaps we put on a pedestal, we analysed, we have an academic community about it. I think we've got to move away from that to thinking that impact is absolutely integral to what we do. We do research for society, we don't do it for ourselves. And that's where I get a little bit twitchy about the questions around how do we ensure we don't get unduly influenced. Science and research should be owned by society, not by those who carry it out, just as every other profession should subject itself to societal attention and accountability. So I'm uncomfortable with the framing of the question. The way I would put it is that research is for society. We should engage them as far as possible in governance and other aspects, and the pandemic has indeed brought that home to us. Today's announcement by Bayes of the People and Culture strategy in research really looks, among other things, at the ownership of research and who should have a stake in that participation in research. I think we have to understand it's not just all about those of us who are professionals doing research in universities, but about the engagement of many other citizen science, essentially, as well. And I think that leads you to the answer about ethics. You are doing science in a way that is engaged with society. The issue of, the vaccines and the fact that there are some downsides has become a subject of public debate, and so it should. The issue of whether we should vaccinate children, difficult issue, is not something the scientists should take. The scientists should provide advice to government. The government should take the views of the public into account and come to a decision. And I think that's a natural way forward. So ethics should be handled because science and research is about our accountability to the public and to governments as the representatives of the public. And we should be used to systematizing that in a way that gives external stakeholders confidence in what we do.
No, that's really, really interesting. And I think, many of us are focusing now on the way in which universities and researchers in universities are embedded in society and in communities. So it's very, very interesting to hear your response to that question, David. I think off the back of that, earlier in the series, we heard from the Director of Research Impact at the University of Lincoln, Dr. Julie Bailey, who I understand is watching today. And she spoke on this very matter.
So many of us have been involved in applied research over the years, and as Dr. Hill said in the start, this is not new. Impact isn't a new thing. What is new is the very financially incentivised, financially weighted and reputational issues around impact. So over the years, we've seen impact shift from a sense of public good into something you are measured on, into something the institution becomes a machine to deliver, and something which determines your financial position and your reputation for many, many years. So it's really the depth of involvement, the depth of thinking that's changed.
So before we move on to our next question, I'd just like to remind viewers that you can send in your questions, and we'll have an opportunity towards the end of the show to ask some of those, to put some of those to David. So David, I'd like now to turn to our next question around impact, and it is the following: how do you think we can ensure that the impact agenda does not disadvantage certain kinds of research, and that diverse forms of research continue to receive adequate funding and adequate acknowledgement?
Well, Shane, I'm going to be naughty and say we shouldn't be talking about the impact agenda. There is no impact agenda. There is science and research, and we should treat it as something we do. That's what the People and Culture strategy produced today is about. The innovation strategy also published today, tackles it from the point of view essentially of innovation in business, although also in some other forms of societal impact. We shouldn't think of it as an agenda. We should think of it as what we do, and we should therefore tackle issues of openness and inclusivity, not in terms of impact, but in terms of everything that we do in research. And I think if we think of it from that point of view, we're challenging, and the People and Culture strategy is all about this. We're thinking of how we take responsibility as significant recipients of public funding to society generally. Now, things have changed, obviously. 21st century science, 21st century society is different to 20th century society. We've learned a lot about the need to take account better of others, to recognize inequity. We haven't learned enough, at least I haven't learned enough yet. And I think we should all be humble. We should involve more people in deciding what we do. We should recognize a broader set of lived experiences. And some of that will feed through into impact assessment, but actually it's got to be embedded in the way our institutions work, our research institutions, both universities and others. And I think some of the challenging issues which Julie has referred to are not about the impact agenda. They're about how we do our jobs as researchers, and actually virtually everything also passes over into our jobs in education. To me, it's a strength of universities that they're doing both education and research. I think that's obvious, but that the issues are essentially the same. Now, in my previous role at HEFCE, I was also involved on the education side, and indeed in widening participation. A lot of the thinking that has gone on there will enrich our understanding of what the research issues are. And I think some of those, again, have been highlighted during the pandemic. In some cases, I think we've done well. In other cases, I think we've done not so well. There may be reasons, but if we don't learn from those reasons, we won't address. So let's set the problem in a broader context of culture, openness, inclusivity, rather than just thinking of it as the impact agenda.
Thanks, David. I do take your point. I mean, I think that part of the challenge with the REF has been that we tend to see it in institutions as divided up between environment and impact and outputs, and I can completely take your point about how that can be counterproductive. I suppose just quickly, another way of putting the question, taking account of what you've just said, is do you think there can be research or should be research that doesn't have any impact? Is that a meaningful question? Is that a meaningful possibility?
Yes, of course. Research is about understanding and insights, and there's certainly plenty research activity where it's clear that we need more knowledge and we need more insights. But it's equally clear that many of the insights we gain didn't come from planned activity. So yes, inherently, we should be pursuing new knowledge. I do think it's always good to ask the question of how might this lead to some practical outcomes. But I think everybody should ask that question. But equally, I think that there's much where we can in no way predict what would happen, but nevertheless there's a good justification for greater understanding. Now, getting that balance right is difficult, but that's the responsibility that those who are in leadership have, and I think it's important that it's a responsibility that's handled by devolved leadership. So we don't want, in my view, a diktat from Whitehall or Swindon or London, anywhere, saying we should have this much of one thing and that much of another. I think those who have responsibility for people, whether they be in institutions at many different levels, have to look at the portfolio of what they do and think through what the balance would be that leads to good outcomes. And I think that's one of the things about the research excellence framework. We chose to emphasise the value of outputs, traditional form of outputs, and I think there's a question of whether, as I said, we continue to think in output terms in the same way. In fact, I would probably say we shouldn't. But we chose to leave most of the way there for two reasons. One, that we have some confidence in the robustness of the data that we collect, because we've been doing the same thing for 30 years, and we understand, there's a whole lot of stuff that's embedded. We should benefit from that. But equally, because if you don't develop new knowledge, you end up with a completely different research system that's dependent essentially on a handful of big players. Now, it's clearly part of the UK's research strategy. Perhaps science superpower is not language that appeals to some, but the principle that we want to be in there with the world leaders in developing new knowledge, I think is right. We are a magnet for people to come and work from abroad in, and of course, research is essentially a global activity. One of the privileges of the last few years has been to visit lots of countries on the impact agenda, but sure, all that has moved on. And I'm now visiting countries talking about how we do global collaboration. people were very nervous about our withdrawal from the European Union, and we've worked through that in terms of Horizon Europe Association. But the interesting thing for me was the reliance that others had on hearing the views of the Brits, not doing everything the same as the Brits, not saying that we were the best, just that we were expected to be active participants in every discussion. And every country I've been to, and it's 25 actually in the last, well, now I'm going to say 3 years because I haven't been traveling for 18 months, 25 countries, including every major research nation, they all view us as desirable partners. Now, that's not something to be let go of lightly. The outcomes from that, in my view, are very good, and certainly our peers in other countries think so. So there's much on which to build. Our whole approach, I think, is based on being leaders in the development of new knowledge and the broadening out towards looking at how that new knowledge benefits society. We're also actually leaders in. So we're in a strong position and we should continue that.
Thanks. That was really interesting to hear, David, especially around the international side. I'm just seeing some comments coming in fact, already in response to some of your answers. And Charlotte Holloway from the University of Hertfordshire has commented, quote, "There is no impact agenda. Fantastic to hear these words. We really need to get away from the separation of impact and research." So that's speaking to people. So thank you for that. Now, ahead of today's event, we've been speaking to Dr. Janice Murray from the University of Edinburgh, who's given us her thoughts on some of the topics discussed today and throughout this series.
Hi, my name is Dr. Janice Murray, and I'm the Research Input Manager and REF Coordinator for the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Edinburgh. To give you a little bit of context, as a school, we've got 130 academic teaching staff and independently funded research fellows. We've got about 400 research assistants and technicians and more than 200 PhD students. And these people are all supported by around 90 professional services staff. I'm responsible for embedding an impact culture within the school and for identifying and communicating the impact that's being generated by our researchers. One of the things that I think is important for us to remember is that the vast majority of funding for our research comes from the public sector, and we have a responsibility to do the best to communicate that research and the discoveries that we make. Often these research findings come in the form of impact. Some of the challenges that spring to mind, I think, first of all, there might be a bit of a lack of understanding about what impact actually is. And one of the ways that we're trying to address this confusion is to get researchers to ask themselves, what benefit has your work brought to or will it bring to the non-academic community? And then we want that thought process to move towards how can we measure those challenges and whether those changes are in behaviour, policy, attitude or knowledge. Another thing that we are keen to communicate is that not all impact should be or can be submitted to REF as an impact case study. We want impact something that is talked about frequently and not just in the run-up to a REF submission. So in the School of Biological Sciences in Edinburgh, we're thinking of impact as a culmination of a number of events. So impact happens when ideas, research and results, knowledge exchange, public engagement, these things all come together. So what we want to do is we want these things to work alongside each other in a more cohesive fashion. So by linking researchers with practitioners of knowledge exchange, public engagement, and raising the profile of ongoing impact within our school, we hope to embed this research into the sort of project thought process as it goes along. In addition, I've produced an impact bulletin for our school, which showcases the impact that's happening all the time, and it hopefully goes some way to keeping impact in the forefront of people's minds.
So David, I think my next question, to some extent, I think you have already been answering it in your previous answers. I'll pose it anyway. To what extent do you think we should expect researchers to focus on responding to today's challenges, and to what extent do you think we need to support open, exploratory research that maybe isn't obviously addressing challenges that we face today or that we've identified as today's challenges?
Well, I do think we've got to tackle today's challenges, and I think it's a critical part of our argument to government for investment that we do that. That was the question the Treasury first asked: show us that you delivered, and I think we were able to do that. But I think you can make, obviously, a strong argument around the pandemic that we were preparing for the future there, not facing up to a immediate challenge that was going on at Oxford, but really that's the tip of the iceberg of lots of work going on in the UK and worldwide. Wasn't focused on any particular thing. It was focused on platforms that would enable you to tackle vital issues. And I think we reasonably should point out that we need to anticipate the future. Equally, I think we've got to be grounded. And getting that balance right, it is a challenge. It's why I think we need a range of structures that allow debate on this. And the Prime Minister talked about new forms of top-level governments, Office for Science and Technology, for example. I think that's really important. I think it's the engagement of people who are tasked with leadership, with a much broader group of people, listening to what the public say and what all sorts of engaged groups say, that will inform the decisions. And I think one of the tremendous strengths of the UK is, well, England, I've got the numbers in England, we've got 133, I think, university institutions in England, about 160 in the UK. We can have a diversity of approach. Some will be more focused on the challenges and opportunities there are in their region. Some will be more focused on global opportunities, while still, in fact, to my sure knowledge, paying plenty attention to local challenges and opportunities. I think diversity of institutions, a diversity of people who are tackling those problems, most of all a diversity of folk who are sharing insights with us. So that includes university councils or boards, that includes different stakeholder groups, and also people playing into the science system more generally rather than to universities. Perhaps I'd just say the absolute critical factor is that we've got to accept that just occasionally we won't always like what people say, and sometimes we'll have to compromise and respond to that. On other occasions, there's things we think will be important that we have to stand up for. But we mustn't assert the ownership by the community. I think that really affects the messages that we send. Currently, some of our colleagues in the arts and humanities are feeling in a difficult position because the education funding is being reduced, and they take that as a mark of society's attention to them. Well, that's not right. But certainly a mark that the government sees their work as not such great importance. Well, the response to that is not to say how important we are, it's to say how important the work we are doing is for the communities that we are in, for our global reach and our engagement with those I was describing, who are world leaders in insights. We need to talk about the benefits that arise from what we do, not about how we feel as individuals and thinking about it. Now, to me, it is just so obvious that the work that goes on in the arts is absolutely at the heart of the regeneration of the country in the current position, particularly in some parts of the country. There's a real cultural focus that drives the economy apart from anything else, but drives, I think, how we all feel about the place in which we live. So there's also, I think, issues that affect 21st century society that without the insights from those who have studied over the years the humanities, we're not able to have a well-rounded discussion. So I think we should be making the case very strongly for everything that we do, both in terms of insights and in terms of practical outcomes. And really, we are there to serve society. That's, in my view, the argument we use.
Thanks, David. And I mean, you picked up there interestingly on arts and humanities and social sciences, and we've had a comment coming in from Ed Curtin-Darling at the Kent Law School on the focus on science and whether you saw distinctions between science disciplines and the others. And I think you've gone a long way to answering that in that response. In your earlier answers, you did mention Brexit, and obviously you've also mentioned the pandemic. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you see Brexit and the pandemic as having changed society's understanding and expectations of research, and thinking in terms of research impact as well.
Well, I think the primary thing for me is that Brexit has polarised views substantially, and I think essentially what we're doing is forward-looking, either in terms of forward-looking on more practical outcomes or in terms of insights and understanding. Occasionally you will learn lessons from the past. I'm not sure that we will learn lessons for the future of what we do from refighting old issues. So I think without taking any view, which I'm not allowed to do anyway in my job, on the rights and wrongs, or indeed on how various things happened during the process, I think we should be focusing on what we're doing for the future. The pandemic has opened out a great opportunity to talk about taking decisions based on evidence. Equally, it has also opened out the challenges that are from being based on just looking at evidence. And if you look at, I think, Trish Greenhalgh's work on masks, although her work is much broader than that, but she's been talking a lot about that, and how if you hold to a very strict evidence-based medicine point of view, you actually, you just don't move fast enough. So I think this understanding of how we take decisions, the role of evidence, all that I think contributes to a forward-looking debate rather than refighting the previous arguments. And I think we should aim to get people much less polarised about the work we do, about research. I can't speak for other areas. I think we should aim to win people over to the obvious benefits that are, in my view, from what we've done. That does mean being humble and accepting that in some cases, as I've mentioned, we were too slow on things. And to explain why occasionally we might have got things wrong. And I think David Spiegelhalter and Anthony Masters have a weekly column pointing out some of the statistical stuff, and I'm a statistician, and I just love the way they present things, often pointing out that some statistical issues are counterintuitive. Now, I think that we could all learn from that. Actually, everybody can learn from statistics anyway, I would say, as a statistician. I think there's huge lessons to be learned. But I think we've got to aim to be positive. We've got to talk about the kind of society we want to be in the future. And that applies to both post-pandemic, where I think we will be different. But how we are different will be the subject of much public debate, and which research needs to tremendously inform. And also to the post-Brexit world, where I absolutely accept there's some very, very tricky things that haven't yet been sorted out, but mostly they're not actually directly in our area. Even today I was talking about the mechanics of ensuring that our Horizon Association is implemented effectively, and that was a very positive and forward-looking discussion.
Thank you, David. Again, really interesting. So, as well as Dr. Janice Murray, we've also been catching up with Rosemarie Barbeau from the University of Glasgow. She's been giving us her overview of all things REF.
My name is Rosemary Barbeau. I am the University of Glasgow Research Impact Manager. I am a veteran of 2 REF impact cycles, having come to the university in early 2012 to take on that responsibility. Since then, I've developed the university's impact support strategy, training, obviously coordination of our REF impact submission, but also, yes, all of the mechanisms that we're doing to sort of embed good practice in collaboration, engagement, and impact generation into our research culture. So what does impact mean to me and our institution? That's and the challenges. I think the challenges are fairly similar to that faced, across the HE sector. I think that I'd like to think, I suppose the challenges have changed in a sense, because obviously REF 2014 was a somewhat flawed and very stressful introduction of change or driver for change, I suppose. And so we had the challenge then of adjusting post-REF 2014. I did find it a flawed exercise. I knew that it was very stressful for the academics that I was working with, but I absolutely agreed with the underpinning ethos of accountability for public funds and the importance of what we do. So, what does it mean to us as an institution? I think it's embedded in our sense of mission. And maybe that comes from a very strong connection with the city, the region, the country we're in, and that, close working with communities, whether that's in the UK or abroad. I think that element of partnership working has been important for a very long time. And so I think it is integral to what we do. I think the challenges are, I would say that the challenges in an institution as large as this is reconciling what we want to do as an institution with what might be happening at local level, or, the differences that you might have at local level in terms of awareness and understanding, mechanisms for workloads, just the different constraints in our different colleges. But I do feel like we are working together fairly successfully to overcome those. How holistically do I think the University of Glasgow is thinking about impact? I mean, we're a large institution, so as holistically as any large institution can, think and approach something, I believe we are doing that with impact. I mean, we, have been advocating for a comprehensive kind of change in the way we, in our research culture and research activities since I became sort of fully aware of the importance of impact, the difference that it makes to the difference that awareness and understanding make to how people work, I suppose. So I think that we have a really supportive senior management team and senior management approach in terms of impact. I think, that is clear from our new research strategy with the focus on, collaboration and careers and creativity. I think you can see that holistic approach in the fact that we have successfully overcome the challenge of the challenges that a lot of institutions face in terms of retaining the institutional memory and combating that short-termism in terms of impact support. So we are in the process of embedding the impact officer role into the central research support offices in each of our colleges, and retaining that REF memory. So I feel and we've also looked very critically at our performance assessment and promotions pathways, and impact is on a par with other elements of academic advancement. So I would say, yeah, we're not doing too badly in terms of that. I would say the focus on careers also in terms of our research strategy is very important, because when we've done a very granular mapping of all of our potential impact case studies last year, and we found that there was a robust evidenced strand of impact in almost half of our case studies that had occurred within 1 to 5 years. So the opportunities that this offers for earlier career researchers is massive, and that's really supported and recognized.
So David, I've been keeping my eye on the questions that have been coming in from our viewers, and we have a very interesting question, I think, from Helen Young at the University of Strathclyde that I'd like to put to you. So Helen asks, in advancing a healthy research culture, and you've been referring to that earlier as well, and focusing on openness and inclusivity to achieve impact, do you think there are tensions arising with the current emphasis upon and preoccupation perhaps with reducing what's called unnecessary bureaucracy?
Well, I think there's tensions in virtually any change that you make, and there's certainly tensions that. So the chap who's doing the bureaucracy review for the government, Professor Adam Tickell, is a former colleague of mine at Royal Holloway, and I've had the pleasure of talking to him about it. I think you've got to consider how you frame this. You can certainly encourage beneficial practices by having some quite clear rules that you stick by. To some, that's unnecessary bureaucracy. To others, it's a way of ensuring fairness. And I think the whole bureaucracy problem has to be tackled by a consideration of the benefit there is, and there's certainly plenty processes that have developed over the years that just haven't been subject to sufficient scrutiny, but to when it's absolutely necessary that we should accept some constraints in what we do as individuals to benefit, society as a whole, or indeed the research system as a whole. And I think there's no easy answer to that. There's no flip answer. You've got to take particular examples and work hard at them. I served with Julia Buckingham and a group of real experts actually on the review of Athena's Swan, and there's no doubt that there are elements of that that had their day, just to be blunt, and indeed now Advance each year taking that forward. So I think, yes, there's tension. Again, this is not something just to engage a handful of people in. This is a broad discussion. So Adam Tickell is going about talking to a lot of people, holding workshops. I think one of the advantages of getting someone in his position to do is they get immediate access to the folk who in the end have to approve changes to the system. And you can test out the strength of feeling there is, for other reasons that you may be unaware of, about particular bureaucratic constraints. So I think it was Helen Young is absolutely spot on. This requires considerable engagement from people on the ground about the benefits as well as the challenges that come from. I mean, I'd prefer to say just different ways of doing things rather than bureaucracy, which is a sort of loaded term. When I want to misbehave a little bit, I say that I'm speaking as a bureaucrat, and if in one level I'm in a post that does involve responsibility for things that has to be followed in a particular framework. On the other hand, every day of my working life has been in some way engaged with the research agenda, starting off from my first days as a statistician in a research institute. And I don't think of myself like that. We've all got to play roles, and we've got to inject our broader understanding into those roles. So Helen, reach out to Adam Tickell.
Thanks very much, David. Helen will hear that loudly and clearly. One of the things that you've touched upon and has come up in the conversation is around the importance of collaboration, both national and international. In the context of the REF, do you think there are ways in which cross-institutional collaboration can be more fully rewarded?
I'm not sure I see that as the biggest problem in what we do, because research is inherently a collaborative activity for most people. I absolutely agree, not for absolutely everyone, but it's pretty rare these days to have research outputs that don't have multiple people's names attached to them, and I think huge numbers involve people from different institutions, and indeed there's reasonable mobility about the research system. I think there are particular issues where collaborating very explicitly is required, and some of them are definitely those which are more outward looking. But I'm not sure I see that as just the biggest issue. I don't think we need to preferentially reward outputs or mark them or however you're doing it, just because they're collaborative. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that collaboration isn't necessarily a mark of quality at all. Collaboration costs money, and there are many, many challenges that can only be tackled by collaborating together. But it takes time and investment, and everybody has to assess on every particular issue whether it's justified, and generally it will be. I mean, I just perhaps mention it too in the context of case studies. Virtually every case study that was presented involved not just the work of the people in the institution, but the work of others. And I think you get into a very linear model of the way research goes through into society if you think we do a bit of research and then it's applied. The research directions should be subject to as much discussion as possible as soon as you get into anything that's in any way accessible. So I'm not sure I see collaboration as a big issue. I think, to be honest, I think it's become embedded in the way that I think impact is becoming and needs to be, so that we're talking about the research system rather than the impact agenda. Similarly, I don't think we need a collaboration agenda. I do think at institutional level there are things to be said about that, but that's not where our current method of research assessment is.
Thanks, David. Again, really interesting, and it makes me think of Ottilien Leiser's comments on the research ecosystem and ways in which we really need to think about that differently in that more embedded, integrated way that you've been emphasising. So thank you for that. We have now another testimonial from Rosemarie Barbeau at the University of Glasgow, and here she's given her thoughts on our Next Generation Impact series.
I found the conversations, the University of Kent conversations, really interesting for three reasons, I guess. I particularly found the future of impact, or I think it was the initial session, very interesting because part of it is validation. You are speaking to people all the time within your own institutions. So, you're constantly having conversations with, academics, with your deans of research, maybe the heads of college, you're at committees, you're putting out papers and presentations and advocating for what you think the logical next steps are. And you have conversations constantly about developments in research impact terms, in terms of funding, the pathways to impact deletion, all of these things. So it's really nice when you hear people speaking and you think, okay, right, that's a reality check. I am on board with current thinking and absolutely not saying anything that's too outlandish, because sometimes you do get trapped a little bit in your own silo, because we are such a large institution and we're all talking to each other. And it's that necessary reminder that, yes, you have colleagues out there, and it's great to hear that we're all thinking the same things and, thinking along the same lines. The other thing is I found it really useful because there were points that I've made internally that were far more cleverly articulated in the session. So I thought, oh, that's a borrow. And the other thing was that sometimes it can be easy to think institutionally, and you have ideas about, yes, and, we should do this. And I thought what was interesting, particularly I liked the positivity that Professor Tina Hoax in the first session expressed, because I also feel that there are a lot of positives that have come around the kind of standardization of the REF framework as far as impact is concerned. To have some kind of standardized assessment is, I guess, sometimes can provide an opportunity for people to see, oh, okay, this is an element that I'm working on. This is what I could expect to demonstrate that I've done this thing. I liked her positivity, but she also had some interesting suggestions, and those came up also from Professor Phillips, I think it was. There were specific suggestions. One was around mentoring, for example, that made me look at our own mechanisms and think about how we could develop those in a more responsive way, in a way that's maybe more suited to needs outside of that the REF mechanistic approach. So I found it, yes, validating, useful articulation of points that I may borrow, and specific examples that kind of took further some of the things that we've been thinking about at top level, but that need translation at a local level. So yes, I also thought the impact storytelling was fantastic, and that's something I think that we do need to work on, and I really was impressed by the quality of the storytelling in that respect.
So, David, we're running out of time, but I would like to ask you just one last question, and it touches upon something that you were talking about earlier when you were speaking about regional, national, and international. Do you think in terms of a hopefully post-COVID world anyway, that there'll be a shift in the way we look at impact in terms of the national versus the international, and how that might work in terms of regional preoccupations as well, given the government's agenda there?
Well, I think there will be, because we'll continue to have considerable debate about the levelling up agenda, and I think so we should. I think we have to accept that we're not getting optimal outcomes from research and development in different parts of the country, partly because we're not putting enough attention on local opportunities and challenges, and if the R&D system is missing something, then we should give attention to it. I think partly because we haven't got sufficient capacity to address problems in some places. So I think if we go back to where we started, the Treasury saying, show us what you've achieved, if they had us in now and said, show us what you're achieving for everyone, then I think that takes some thinking about, and that is essentially levelling up. It's about levelling up outcomes so that we get beneficial outcomes for everyone. Which groups, and you can think of this more broadly, of course, than just geographic distribution. Which groups are we not sorting? Are we not addressing? Which, again, very simply, what health challenges are being neglected? And actually, the health people, I think, have got a lot of thinking already into this.
Thank you, David. I would love to sit here for another hour with you. I know you're very busy, but I'd love to sit here with you for another hour asking more questions. I really would like to say a very big thank you to you for answering all of these questions today. We've been given some fantastic and fascinating insights. And I'd also like to thank everyone at home or wherever you are at work for tuning in and sending through your questions and comments. On behalf of everyone behind the Next Generation Impact series, I'd like to thank all of you who've participated across our 6 episodes and to thank everyone who switched on and watched and sent in their questions. We hope it's been eye-opening and an exciting experience. I think it's been really, really interesting listening today to David Sweeney's thoughts. For more on some of the amazing work that's being done at the University of Kent, head to the Research Excellence Team's webpage and you'll get lots of further information there. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day and we hope to see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
We're interested in using the large-scale data that becomes available from the SARS coronavirus 2 outbreak and using that with the other large-scale data that's available about human genes and proteins so that we can try to understand why the virus causes disease, why it differs from other related viruses, and why we see different responses in individuals.
My research is set out to explore the impact of COVID-19 on community pharmacies and community pharmacy teams. When GPs closed their doors and went on to digital consultations, pharmacists were still open and had to communicate by face-to-face interactions.
Don't forget, you as an individual matter. You have a role to play. Every day you live, you make an impact, and you get to choose what sort of impact you make.